Shalom Aleichem. Next shir on the first Mamer of Tovshin Lamed Hey. Tiku BaChodesh Shofar b'Kesel Yom Chagenu. I don't want it to sound like I'm a meat packer. It's one of the greatest chusim I have in my life. I teach the Rebbe's Torah, the Rebbe's Maimorim. And of course, in teaching you the Rebbe's Maimorim, I got to learn the Rebbe's Maimorim. I'm forced to learn the Rebbe's Maimorim. And the Rebbe's Maimorim are a world. They're a world, in comparison to the rest of the Rebbe's Torah. They're a chativa b'fnei atzmei, the Rebbe's Maimorim. And the argument can be made that this is true more of the later Maimorim than of the earlier Maimorim, because the earlier Maimorim are more typical, more consistent with the traditional Maimer from an earlier Rebbe. You can often say that you can identify a Maimer against a Maimer. The Rebbe is reviewing a Maimer from a particular Rebbe. In the later Maimerim, there's much more originality. It's the Rebbe's own Maimerim. And of course also the Maimerim of the Rebbe juxtaposed against Maimerim of the earlier Rabbeim. And I would say that one of the characteristics of the Rebbe's Maimerim, which separates them from the Maimerim of the Rabbeim before, certainly the Maimerim of the later years, is that the Rebbe really speaks to the topic of the Maimer. What I mean to say when I say this is that in the Maimerim of the earlier Rabbeim, there's a bir, there's a pasuk quoted, or a Mamer Chazal mentioned, or a passage from the Siddur mentioned, and then you'll have occasionally what's called lahavin in Eirin Tov, lahavin in Chodesh Tishrei, lahavin in Simchas Torah, and so on. And the Rebbe will ask a number of questions, and then say lahavin zeh yesh lahagdam tchila. To explain this, we have to preface first, and he'll go off talk about an issue in Kabbalah, or in Chassidus, or in Mussar, or in Avodah, which is completely separate on the surface from the topic of the Maimer. And at the very end, after he goes through this whole discussion and he asks questions and he gives answers on a more mystical concept, he'll come back to the original concept. The Rebbe, I feel, more than most Rabbeim, maybe more than all the Rabbeim, what the Maimer begins with is the whole Maimer. Not always. There are Maimerim of the Rebbe where the Rebbe is literally chazening a Maimer from an earlier Rebbe, or to some extent chazening a Maimer from an earlier Rebbe, so there'll be what's called the Maimer and the Bir, the beginning and the end, that's called the Siyum, and also the body of the Maimer itself. But the Rebbe, I would say more often than not, that means more than 50% of the time, will start a Maimer on a particular topic, and the entire Maimer will speak to that topic. He will not go off and talk about things which are on the surface, separate from the topic to which Maimer begins. And there's no question that this Maimer, the one in front of us, this Tiku, it's a Rosh Hashanah Maimer. All he talks about is Rosh Hashanah. He doesn't talk about Eirin Tov. He doesn't talk about any issue. He talks about Rosh Hashanah. The Maimer is only 6 pages long. It's not even full 6 pages because the last page is 2/3 of a page. And we're managing to stretch this into 2 shiurim, which is part of our, what do you want to call it, genius? Our ability, as they say in Yiddish, oith tzitzi in the neshama. I was originally planning to teach it all in one sitting. I decided to make it into 2 classes because if you listen to the last class, you know that it seems to me that this Maimer is very typical. And I'm looking for where the Rebbe is being a machadish. B, I found 2 points in this Maimer that I do feel are nerves, are sensitive issues that the Rebbe is touching on. Although the Rebbe touches on them very concisely and very briefly, I personally believe, and this is just my opinion, and ich bin azak gar nicht ein milim, I'm not qualified, ich bin a pashtarid, but I try to learn and I try to tell you what I understand, and you can disagree, you can disregard, and you can do with what I'm teaching you as you wish. But it seems to me that these 2 points are where this Maimer is a little bit deeper and different. So what I did was, we learned page 231, 230 to the top of 233, we learned all the questions. Why does it not say Tiku BaChodesh Shofar? Why doesn't it say what Chodesh? Why doesn't it say Tiku BaChodesh BaShofar or Tiku BaShofar BaChodesh, which makes more sense? And you have to have the Gemara that says B'Kesel Yom Chagenu to know that it means Tishrei and Rosh Hashanah. Why is Rosh Hashanah on Aleph Tishrei and not on Chaf Hei B'Yelul? And the Rebbe says, first of all, you can make 2 Rosh Hashanahs, one on Aleph Tishrei and one on Chafei B'Elul. Second of all, Chafei B'Elul has advantages of a Rosh Hashanah in many ways. Most notably, that you actually say on Rosh Hashanah, Zikaron L'Yem Rishon, which is in many interpretations a reference back to Chafei B'Elul. In addition to all of that, the Rebbe argued that Chafei B'Elul is Bereishis, and Bereishis is the Mamer Klali, while Mamer Nasa Adam is only a Mamer Prati, which speaks to the advantage of Chafei B'Elul over Rosh Hashanah again. So why do we celebrate Rosh Hashanah, not Chafei B'Elul? So of course the answer is that Rosh Hashanah, everything is Chayzer L'Kadmus, everything is reset and starts all over again. And the Rebbe asks another question. And this question is a logical question and a serious question. The question is, Hashem renews the world every second from nothing into something, from a non-existential state into an independently existential state. And in as much as the Eibishter is renewing the world, b'chol rega v'rega, in what way is Rosh Hashanah special altogether? It's just another moment. So those were the questions. How many questions is that? I numbered them as many as 8. But however you wish to divide the questions, it's Tiku BaChodesh Shofar. Why doesn't it say which Chodesh? Why doesn't it say Tiku BaChodesh Shofar? And the big question is, why do we celebrate Rosh Hashanah, not Chafei B'Elul? And there's a whole reason, a slew of arguments that would argue that Chafei B'Elul is preferred as Rosh Hashanah over Rosh Hashanah, and yet we celebrate Rosh Hashanah, not Chafei B'Elul. And if Hashem creates the world from nothing into something, from a non-thing into a thing, into an independent thing, b'chol rega v'rega, so how is Rosh Hashanah's Chachos altogether? Now, if you learned the previous share with me, you know that in the course of that last question, the Rebbe says that Yesh Mayayin is on 3 levels. Number 1, the creation of the world is Yesh Mayayin, which is b'chol rega, it's renewed in time every single moment. Number 2, the Chayas, the life of the world, is also Yesh Mayayin, and therefore also renewed b'chol rega v'rega. And number 3, the Ratzon of creation is also Yesh Mayayin, and therefore renewed b'chol rega v'rega. And this is where, and the Rebbe doesn't delve very deeply into this, he simply states it. The first idea is understandable and classic. The second idea is problematic, and the third idea is, I think, controversial. And I talked about both of those questions in the previous class, and it took time. So it led me to the decision that instead of giving a 2-hour class, I should give 2 classes. The previous class, I'm not sure exactly how long it is yet, but I'm figuring it's under an hour. This class I figure will be around an hour. It's better for everybody if I divide it up into 2. And in that class I touched a little bit on answering how you could explain why Chayes is V'sav B'chol Rega V'rega, Yesh Maim B'chol Rega V'rega, even though it's a question, and even the Ratz. So now we're going to learn the answers to the Mamer. The answers begin in reverse. The Rebbe is answering the last question first. If Hashem creates the world every second from nothing into something, from a non-thing, milei dava l'dava, from a non-thing into a thing, from an ayin into a yesh, in what way is Rosh Hashanah now? So the Rebbe begins on page 233 and he says, the answer is as follows. It says in the Alter Rebbe Siddur, the Mamer in the Alter Rebbe Siddur, which explains Kavanas of Tchiyah Shev according to Kavanas Abal Shem Tov. Now I'm no Mekubal, but you know that that means Chassidim, who are shaykhs to Inyanim of Kavanas, are Mechaven all the Kavanas according to the Kisvei Harizal. And as you may know, there are 4 different Sidurim of Kisvei Harizal. As far as I understand, 3 of them were made by Talmidei Abal Shem Tov, and it's a likud from the Teres of the Harizal, whatever they had at that time. The Eitz Chaim, the Pri Eitz Chaim, some of the Shmei Nashiarim, whatever the case is. Maybe they had the Shara Kavanas, I don't know. And our Rabbeim preferred the Siddur Reb Shapsi. Reb Shapsi Ashkeve, there's Siddur Reb Yankiv and Siddur Reb Asher, which again I think are also Talmidei Abal Shem Tov. But our Rabbeim preferred the Siddur Reb Shapsi. The 4th Siddur is called Siddur Zalkeve. I never saw it. I once saw it online. I don't own it. I own the other 3. I own Siddur Reb Asher, I own Siddur Reb Yankiv, Siddur Reb Shapsi. I think Zalkeve was made by the Misnagdim, by the Talmidei Agra, but I'm not sure. But there are 4 versions of Siddur Harizal, and our Rabbeim preferred the Siddur Harizal, the Girsa of Reb Shapsi. But there are 2 cases where the Baal Shem Tov went against the Kavanas of the Harizal. One is the Kavanas of Mikveh, and the other is the Kavanas of Tchiyah Shofar. So those Kavanas, literally the Kabbalah The meditations are printed in the Alter Rebbe Siddur with Chassidus, not in the regular Siddur of the Alter Rebbe, because since it's Shavuot L'chol Nefesh, the Rebbe explained the Alter Rebbe did not put the Kavanas in because most people are not shaykhs to Kavanas, and he wanted everybody to know that he's not making his Siddur for Yechidei Segula. The Chabad Siddur, the Nusach Hari Siddur of the Alter Rebbe, was not made just for rare, exclusive individuals. The Alter Rebbe intended it for everybody, which is another piece of controversy and shturim and koch and so on and so forth. So there's a Mamer in the Alter Rebbe Siddur which addresses the Kavanas which the Alter Rebbe printed. The Alter Rebbe Siddur was printed by the Mittler Rebbe together with the Siddur. And he says, what's special about Rosh Hashanah is Pnimius. Pnimius means the inner dimension, or like I like to translate the word, the face. Pnimius hadibur, the face of the divine speech. Pnimius hamayis, the face of the divine emotion. Pnimius hamayich, the face of the divine intellect. Ad lebechinas pnimius hatainuk, the face of the divine delight. So there's chitzonius, there's pnimius, there's an outer level and there's an inner level. And it may be true that BaChodesh the Eibishter renews the world, not just on Rosh Hashanah, and not only does he renew the world, he renews the chayes of the world. And not only does he renew the chayes of the world, he renews the ratzon of the world, but all of that is the chitzonius. The chitzonius of the world, that means the world as it is by itself, is renewed BaChodesh. The chitzonius of the chayes, that means the chayes, which is negeah, for the chef of the creation, before the kavan of the creation, before the pnimius, and the ratzon of the creation, which is the chitzonius haratzon, the ratzon of the creation for the creation as such, is renewed b'chol rega v'rega. But then there's something called pnimius. And the pnimius is not the what of the creation, but the why. Why did the Eibishter make the world? Or to say it differently, for the Eibishter to create a world is not a big deal. For the Eibishter to care about the world, and for the world to matter to the Eibishter, to the extent that Vayoch, that Atzmas Musin Sov Baruch Hu is invested in the creation, that's not a part of the creation. That's part of the Pnimius. And that's what happens on Rosh Hashanah. Yossi, look at Rosh Hashanah, there's a departure. Everything is reset. And it goes back to how it was in the beginning, like the Rebbe said in the last paragraph on the previous page, on page 232, says the Rebbe, but the world doesn't disappear. At Rosh Hashanah, when you have that moment of Dormita, until the night of Rosh Hashanah, when you say L'David Mizmer, which is the beginning of the Hamshach of the Pnimius, and the next morning when you blow Shofar, which is the end of the Hamshach of Pnimius, the world still exists. Why? Because the Bebchinas HaChitzenius, on the peripheral level, on the outer level, in other words, the world as a world, and even the world as a world with life, and even the world as a world with life and divine will, but it's the will of the world per se, not the will of the purpose of the world. Ein bazeh shinui klal. That never changes. Hashem makes the world as according to our Mamer every single instant. Hashem creates the life of the world according to our Mamer every single instant. Hashem creates the will for the world, and according to our Mamer every single instant. All of this never changes because we're talking about the body of the creation as such. For example, a person who is a malacha, that he's doing work. But the work is mitzad eizet tainuk v'ratzon sheyesh lebazeh. The reason he's doing this work is because he has a desire and pleasure. Meaning not only he wants it, he has a reason why he wants it. Not only he's doing it, but he has an investment in why he's doing it. The way it works is first you have the anticipation for what you're going to do, and the pleasure that inspires, and the deep desire to do it that inspires, and then later you go ahead and you actually do it. So the Rebbe says, Hine, if for some reason a person would get up one day and not be in the mood, the desire and the pleasure that creation would give him is gone, but he continues to work without the pleasure. He continues doing what he's doing, but it's mitzad bechinas hachitzenius. He's doing it only to continue the work of creating what he's wanting to create, without the inspiration and the meaning that comes from the pnimius, from the why he's doing all of this. And it's inevitable that if you're doing something that you were at one point very inspired to do, and later on you're no longer inspired to do it, so that when you do it later on, it's hibe'efen derif yen yadayim, your hands are weak. You do it, but there's no chayas. The example which is cited for this is a person who's asleep. As he sleeps, as you sleep, you're still alive. But the quality of that life is that you're breathing, and that you're metabolizing your energy, and that you're metabolizing the food that you may have eaten during the day, and your body is reconstructing the cell parts and using the energy reserves that it has to sustain the body and to keep the body going. But there's not a lot of meaning in that life. It's just biological life. Yes, on an outer level you're still living. But the pnimius, the why of life, the what, the meaning of life is missing. And he continues, the same is true on high. Interrupts the pnimius achayis. It continues to bring the flow of life to the world from the level which is called chitenius. The pnimius hachayis is gone, meaning to say what the Eibishter gets out of this world. Or to say it in other words, how in this creation of his, he is fully invested, is missing. And all you have is the lashon that you have in Netanya is a part of it, the few words needed to create and to sustain the world as a world by itself. So when the Eibishter creates the world, and as far as the Torah is concerned, and the purpose of the world is concerned, there's the face of it and there's the rear of it. There's the pnimius of it and there's the chitenius of it. The pnimius of it is the what and the why. And the chitenius is the what is it. It's conceivable that the external involvement of Hashem in the world, which means that he continues to create the world. And in the language of the paragraph before this one, he renews it every instant. When the face, when the pnimius is gone. It is only that the mikivan shahamshach, since the investment of alakus, when the pnimius is removed, is mebechinas chitenius bilvad. It's only on a peripheral level. Hashem is continuing to create the world, but no gishmak, no chayis in the world. He be'efen derifin adam koyachol, his hands are weak. You may remember one of the early Maimon that we learned recently. That means from the Elul of Lamed Daled, I'm imagining, where the Rebbe said that some years nobody blew shofar, and some years no one made the Eibush into a melech. And the Rebbe says that on those years that the Eibush, nobody blew shofar and the Eibush was not made into a melech, Hashem continues to create the world, but he's a moshel and he's not a melech. Melech means malchus beratzon, that the world accepts him willfully. If there's nobody blowing shofar, there's nobody saying the world continues to exist. But in the words of this Mamer, it's a rifyan daim. His investment is weak because he's creating the world without a pnimius interest, a real meaningful interest. And because of this, it's necessary for mankind, for Yidden, to reawaken his will. But he says in the parenthesis, Pnimius haratzon, the ill will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu from new. Now I want to just observe that the opposite of Pnimius haratzon is Chitenius haratzon. And I'm going to dare say that when the Rebbe said on page 232 that Yesh Miyayin is b'chol rega v'rega about the Elamis, and Yesh Miyayin is b'chol rega v'rega about the Chayas, and Yesh Miyayin is b'chol rega v'rega about the Ratzon, he means Chitenius haratzon, not Pnimius haratzon. Chitenius haratzon is renewed b'chol rega v'rega. Rosh Hashanah comes, the Pnimius haratzon is renewed, and it's conceivable that the Pnimius haratzon should be interrupted. And on some level, every year, Erev Rosh Hashanah, when you have this moment which is called Durmita, which literally means sleep, it's always interrupted. And Yidden, through Avodah, have to renew the Pnimius haratzon. And the source of this inner will, which is not about the creation of the world, but the purpose of the creation of the world is the fact that Hashem knows that this is going to delight him. Hashem is going to get delight from the creation. Hashem is going to delight from us. As odd as it is to think of the Eibishter being delighted by anything that we can do for him, this is the Metzias Hadvarim as it's explained in Teira Semes, in the true Teira. This is the meaning of Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah will renew the creation in a way that's not renewed every instant, even though we know about Yesh Miyayin b'chol rega v'rega, both in terms of the creation, in terms of the Chayas Eliki, which is vested in creation, in terms of the Ratzon, because that's all speaking about Chitzenius. The Chiddush Rosh Hashanah is Pnimius, the face of God, the real interest and investment and pleasure of the Eibishter from the world. And this is not renewed every second, and this is not always present, it can be interrupted. And Rosh Hashanah, Mamshich and B'chinas Pnimius, HaTanya Rosh Hashanah, we bring forward a renewed inner, the face of his delight, it comes down to the face of his intellect, meaning to say that the seichel of the Eibishter's investment in the world is not seichel of B'riyas Elam. It's seichel ateda, what said as hadibis, it's seichel of the purpose of the creation, and then pnimis hamidus inner midas hakadosh baruch hu, which is not only chesed and gevura, but it's ave and yira. Hashem really cares about the world. Ad lebechinus pnimis hadibis, the speech of the Eibishter includes the face of his speech, which is the purpose for why he's speaking and why he's creating the world. In other words, hamshachas bechinus apnimius. That Rosh Hashanah, there's a renewal, not just in the fact that Hashem is creating the world, and He's creating it, there's a renewal of the purpose of the world, of the Eibishter's real interest in the world, which is called Pnimius. The infinity of God, the true infinity of God, is concerned with and interested in, and so to speak, needy of, and is delighted by His creation and how we serve Him. That interest is renewed in Rosh Hashanah. And he adds that bechinas apnimis pel gam b'chitenius. When the Eibishter renews his inner will, it affects the chitenius as well. That the outer world, which is the world as such, right? Continents and oceans and marine animals and land animals and lahad elef achad human beings, both Jews and non-Jews, they're the Eibishter's creation, but they're chitenius. They're just the creation as such. And when the Eibishter's pneumistic interest in all of this is renewed, they change. The world at large changes, including the animals, the plants, and the minerals. That as at that point, the investment of Hashem in the creation should be laid by different. It's not that Hashem is creating the world with weak hands, because He's doing it and doesn't show exactly why. The pneumis is invested. So when the moment that the Eibishter interrupts the pneumis, He still continues to create the world, but there's a phenomena called there's a weakening of His investment in the creation, because there's no interest in the creation. But when the interest in the creation is renewed, which is called pnimius, so the creation itself is not done away of rifi and daim. So the pnimius affects the chitzenius. The inner will of Hashem, which is for Yidden to learn Torah and do mitzvahs and make a dira le'etzbarach b'tachtenim, affects the chitzenius, the will of Hashem, which is alei seras, and Hashem should create all the worlds, and He creates them me'ayim ve'efes amuchat le'esh b'chol rega v'rega. And the Rabbi continues and he says, this answers the question in the paragraph before. How could there be a schachas and a shoshana? When there's a schachas b'chol rega v'rega? And the answer is because the schachas b'chol rega v'rega is in the levels of chitenius. And the schachas of Rosh Hashanah is pnimius. And this also explains the question before this one, the bottom of page 131 and the top of page 132. Mashakov Rosh Hashanah, why it was fixed by them? And that means the Eibishter. Kavu sounds like Chazal. Teresh Paped, no? Kavu? But Kavu is the Eibishter Kvayach. That they, the Eibishter Kvayach, fixed Rosh Hashanah. Dafka, the man was created, and not on the day when the world was created. What stands out about the creation of man? I'll call on Ibrahim of all creations that came before him, and I'm going to add it for the 15th time. The creation itself, the life of the creation itself, and the will for the life of the creation itself on the level of Chitzeni is, man is superior to all of them in the respect, because when man is created, and he has free will, and he's able to choose Hashem as being a king, and have a ratzon in the Eibishter's Maluch, which creates a ratzon in the Eibishter to be a melech, this is all the Pnimius. The Tzemach Tzedek explains in one of his Maimarim, what's special about the creation of man? Which is why it was determined by the Eibishter in his Heilige Torah that the day that we would commemorate, in as much as creation is concerned, would be Rosh Hashanah, the day of the creation of man, not the day of the creation of the world. It's not because on that day Hashem spoke, let there be man. As the Rebbe asked the question on page 232, Nasa Ad was only one of the 7 months, and is superior to Mamer Nasa Adam. So the Rebbe now answers that question. It says, we're not saying that creation is a Yev of the Maisa Bereshis because of the Mamer Nasa Adam. Nasa is Takechitzenius. But rather because of the idea of Vayipach B'apav Nishmas Chaim, Hashem blew into his nostrils the breath of life. That it says in Tanya from the Zeya, man, the Nafach one blows Metechiyah, Nafach blows his innermost parts. Metechiyus Lipnimi Yusei, and this is in addition to the Nasa Adam. Now let me just interrupt and point out. The Pasuk when Yipav Abdish Chaim, look in footnote 22, is in Kapitel Beis. The Maimon Nasa Adam is Kapitel Aleph. So there's the creation of man as one of the Asar Mamaris. And there's the creation of man as he is part of the Kavanas Habriya. Now Rashi says, in Kapitel Beis, where he speaks about the creation of animals again, and Adam gave them names, and the creation of man again, and the creation of Chava from Adam and all the rest, that this is just a rehashing of what's written in the first Pasha in more detail, Rashi says. But you could argue that it's two different things. Everything written in the first Pasha of creation is Chitzenius, including the creation of man. Everything written in Pasha Shniya of creation is not just repeating in more detail what was already said. This is the Pnimius. And there's an unbelievable Ramban in Bereshis which would support that argument. Because the Ramban says in Bereshis that when Hashem created human beings, they were alive. They were bipedal and they were alive. But they were the same as animals. In other words, Rashi holds Gomiro Enach. When Hashem created Adam Rishon, He created him a goyler. Look at the Teda Eda Bereshis agrees with that position. That when man was created, he was a goylem, he was lifeless, and then he blew a breath of life into a goylem, into a mannequin, into a lifeless form of clay. But the Ramban disagrees. The Ramban holds that man was made a living being, like an animal, and then afterwards he added another nefesh. Now I'm not sure, I'm not saying this is Pshat and Mamer, but it certainly serves our purposes. If you're going to say that the whole Peidik Aleph, including the Maimon Nasa Adam, is creation of Chitzenius, meaning that there's a Chitzenius the command, which is how man, even though he's different than animal, is part of the world per se, and the investment of Hashem in him is Chitzenius, in the language of this Maimon, which is called Berifya Yadayim. And then there's the second parsha where he adds an Neshama, and that's the Pnimius. But the Rebbe says, Kidu, it's known, the root of the Neshama is all from the inner dimension of Kalim, as opposed to Malachim, which are Chitzenius. Now, I don't want to be ma'idach in this, but years and years ago, I sort of researched this and drew some conclusions. I've since asked myself, maybe I need to revisit all of my sources. It's in the third Chelek of Ein Beis, and in the Chelek, it's in the Geras HaKedesh, Yekutas Achrin, Lav Mashkos HaPriyetz Chaim. That there's four levels. There's Pnimius HaKelim, which is the really Gavana Eir, that's Esis HaTeira. There's Chitzenius HaKelim, and that's Mitzvahs. Then there's Pnimius Chitzenius HaKelim, and that's the source of the Neshama Yisrael. Because the Neshama Yisrael have two milas. A, they're Elikus, and B, they're separate. To be separate, you have to be Chitzenius, but to be Elikus, you have to be Pnimius. So you know the Pnimius of Chitzenius HaKelim. And the rest of the creation, including the Malachim, are from Chitzenius HaKelim. So the Rebbe generalized, and the Shabbos come from Pnimius HaKelim. This is what separates souls from angels. That angels are created from Chitzenius HaKelim, and it really means Chitzenius HaKelim, which means they're created from a source, which becomes separate from Elikus in the kind of way that it essentially is no longer Elikus, which is like Klipa, because they come from Pnimius. So even the way they come into this world, Elikus, Shanasa, Nivid, they continue to be Elikus. And he continues and he says, when you say angels here, you don't only mean angels, but you mean the called shluchei Hashem, any shliach that the Eibishter employs to send life to the creation, which includes the Gechav and Mazal, they're also called Malachim. And in footnote 26, they're Metzayin to the Meir Nevuchim. So all the entities in creation that Klayachal are used by Hashem as tools to give life to the creation are called Malachim. Says that Malachim Shar Sham, Bechinas Chitzenius HaKelim, Malachim are Chitzenius HaKelim, Malachim are Klip. Malachim serve Hashem, Malachim have total bittul, and Malachim are amazing. So what does it mean that Malachim are Klipa? It means two things. The whole Avodas Hashem of a Malach is Teva. There's no real choice. And the service of a Malach to the Eibishter is limited and it will never change. So everything, like it says in the Siddur of Vayivarach David, Chol tzva hashamayim l'chom mishtachavim is a part of Atahu Hashem Elokim. Ata sisis hashamayim. Hashem created the world, and He created the world's bittul to Him. There's no avodah. It's the teva of a malach. Just like water flows downhill, a malach bows to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's no real free will. And that's why you have a third, Atahu Hashem Avram, where you have free will, and so on. So Malachim are very sophisticated, they're very close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and in truth they're Chitzenius, they're like Klipa. Now their Klipa is very holy, we wish we were as Klipa as they are, yeah? But there's no free will in their Avodah, and there's no growth, there's no transcendence of self in their Avodah. When the Sham is Pnimius HaKelim, the Sham is from the inner dimension of Kelim, and Pnimius HaKelim is one with Oir, it's a Lukus. And if you learn the Mamer, let's say for example in Samach Tes, Chitenius HaKelim is like Shem HaPe'ula, and Pnimis HaKelim is like Shem HaTeya. But again, more specifically, it's Chitenius HaKelim, Malachim, and Pnimis of Chitenius HaKelim, which is the Neshama Yisrael, which makes this all very complicated. But we're not going into it now, number one, and I'm not prepared to teach about it because I don't know enough about it to teach it, number two. And he says, is it not true that even the inner dimension of Kelim is after all Kli? And Kli means separate, Kli means Mitzias by itself. How do you do? Everybody knows the famous Mamer from the Rebbe Rashab from Tafresh above, V'yem Simchaschem. Now understand, V'yem Simchaschem is 20 Amudim. It's a very short Hemshech. But all the Maimonim caught it. Why? Because it was the first. The Rebbe Rashab's deeper Hemshechim, the Ranat, and then the Tafresh Samach and Samach Aleph and Samach Beis, they're all referring back to V'yem Simchaschem, because he speaks very Yossi Dik in Yanim in that Mamer about the day of Kedusha and the day of Klipa, 10 and 11 in Kedusha, 10 and 11 in Klipa, and so on. So the Rebbe refers back to the Maimah B'Yem Simchaschem, even though there are so many other Maimorim with the same ideas are discussed, but they discuss more about Yichus. It's interesting that the Rebbe should make reference to the B'Yem Simchaschem, and he mentions the Rebbe Rashab. And I suspect that part of the reason he's mentioning the Rebbe Rashab, just like before he mentioned the Tzemach Tzedek, is he wants to mention the Rabbeim by name and their Teda, but I'm not sure he mentions all the Rabbeim. He certainly does not mention the Mesicha Magid, as I told you in the beginning of the last class. That it says in the Maimah with the Rebbe Rashab, and specifically in the B'Yem Simchaschem, that Pnimis HaKelim Yuchad and Pnimis Eir, the inner dimension of Kelim is one with Eir. And not Stam with Eir is one with Pnimis Eir. Moreover, Ad Bechinas Etzem Eir is connected to the level of Etzem, which is even higher than Kelim B'chlal. If you're familiar with the sugya of Chitenius HaKelim, Shem HaPe'ula, Shem HaTeya, and Shem HaEtzem, Shem HaPe'ula is Chitenius HaKelim, Shem HaTeya is Pnimis HaKelim. Shem HaEtzem is Oir, and we say about Shem HaEtzem, Yav Chochmas Allah Hakim, and any person connected to Pnimis Eir can have not only the Madrega called Shem HaTeir, but can also have the Madrega which is called Shem HaEtzem, which means not only, for example, Chochma, as it is in the level of Pnimis HaKeli, but can have Chochma and Madrega of Eir, and the two are connected. So Pnimis HaKelim gives you a connection to Lakus, and Pnimis HaKelim gives you a connection to the Madrega of Eir, which is higher than Kelim altogether. And you'll have to forgive me for not spending 45 minutes explaining to you this whole business with Kelim. Like I said before, the Rebbe is not giving us enough here to warrant, a Haskalah cascade, a Haskalah flood of the sugya of Kelim, and I'm not prepared. I'm not in the right mindset, not in the right frame of mind, not in the right space to go into this at the moment. So we're going to leave it in translating the Divrei Harav. So because neshamas come from Pnimis HaKelim, they're automatically connected to Pnimis HaOir and even to Etzem Oir. Ube'emes, and to be sure, in Yaakavono, when it says in the Pasuk, which the Zohar then explained, Man the Nafach Metachi and Nafach Yipach Bap of Nishmas Chai. Hashem blew into his nostrils a breath of life, and in this the Zohar says, Man the Nafach Metachi and Nafach, one blows, he blows my innermost parts. And Alter Rebbe interprets this to mean that in an neshama is invested elokus on the highest madrege. Says the Rebbe, it means to say the root of the neshama is l'maylo. The root of the neshama is not only higher than Chitenius HaKelim, it's even higher than Pnimis HaKelim. It's even higher than the idea of Etzem, which is Mislabish and Pnimis HaKelim. The Shadish of the Neshama Yisrael is Bechindas Pnimis HaTainug, the innermost dimension of Tainug. Well, Amaylam Yesa even higher till Pnimis HaAtzmas, the face of God, so to speak, himself. And the Rebbe says in Yiddish, Ados vas dort is Shayches in Pnimis. To whatever extent you can say about Etzmas, the idea of Chitenius and Pnimis, the Neshama Yisrael, well, there you go, Pnimis over there as well. So we say, on the one hand, the Neshamas come from Kelim, and you have to justify Neshamas being the Pnimius because they come from Pnimius, I and all of that. But then you say the Sherish of Neshamas is much, much higher. Or the idea that you always bring in Chassidus is that the Sherish of the Neshama is higher than Teda. When the Neshama comes into the world, the Sherish of the Neshama is much lower than Teda, and you need the Teda to reconnect the Neshama to Hashem. You need the Teda to reveal the real truth of the Neshama, but once that happens, the roles are reversed. The Teda is Makash, the Neshama is Makash, Teda Shemayla HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's what the Rebbe is speaking to here. Neshamas come from Kelim, which is a problem. Neshamas come from Pnimis HaKelim, is a shtickle solution. And that the emes Sherish of the Neshama is much higher is a full solution. And I just want to throw in, even though it's not Negeya, that you have in a number of Maimorim where they talk about the idea of Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. Right? There's Kinei Mitzvah Teira, mitzvahs are candles, and Teira is light. And then you have Ner Havai Nishmas Adam, that the Neshama is a candle. So in most Maimorim, when you say the neshama is a candle, you mean that the neshama is like the cup that holds the fuel and the wick, not the fire. That's keli. But first of all, in Tanya, in more than one place, in Perek Yutes, and then of course in Shari, in the Shari Chemuna Perek Dalet, when you say Neravai Nishma Sodom, the neshama is the fire, the oir, which is a big chiddush. So in the Maimorim, they bring that most neshamas come from kelim, but rare neshamas like Hashem B'Yechai, they're the madrega of oir. And l'cha'ere b'oimek yoser, it's two different madregas in every neshama. Every neshama in hishtalshus comes from kelim, Navadanu comes from pnimius kelim, l'kus shenasa nivra. Even though it becomes a nivra, it continues to be a l'kus. But hidden behind that is this, so to speak, the rashbi, which is in each neshama, which is that the neshama comes from the fire, the oil, and not the candle, and not the keli, lansish belas, not the keli. So here the Rebbe says both of those things. In as much as neshamas come from kelim, they come from pnimius eir, which pnimius kelim, which is connected to pnimius eir and etzem eir, and even on a higher level they come from eir itself. So the Rebbe therefore says, "V'hine, ba'acharei ma'asher kosov." So we know, v'yipach ba'apav nishmas chaya means Hashem blew into the guf of Adam Rishon a breath of life. And let's just go with this Ramban that I mentioned before because it's so useful to us. That man was already living. When the Eibush said, Mamer Nasa Adam, man was created, but not like it says in Chumash Rashi and in Teire Eire Bereshis. Go mira wenecha, he was created as a goylem, as a lifeless form, but he was actually living, walking around bipedally, but he didn't have Tzelem Elokim, he didn't have, according to the Rambam, he didn't have Seichel, according to us, he didn't have Elokus and Bechira Chavshis and so on. And then afterwards, he blew into that living being, a nefesh chaya, another soul. Which made him pnimius, the purpose of the creation. But then the Rebbe says, there's a third pasuk. Man became a living being. So the first step is, the second step is, and the third step is, and you move in the questions become once it says Hashem blew into the nostrils of man a breath of life. So now he's not only alive, but he's connected to the purpose of living. Pnimi is Mamer. What is then added when it says again, but he Adam nefesh chai, man became a living being. So of course you have the famous Targum, the Ruach Memalala, and so on. So, but the Rebbe here gives a different pshat. The teretz which is negating this Mamer, and the Rebbe says it says in other Sfarim, and there's no mocker, which I find very interesting. What is added by this third idea after the Mamer Nasa Adam and after the Yipach Ba'apav Nishmas Chaya? The third idea that Hashem made man to a living being is Sh'Adam Nasa L'Nefesh Chaya, that the human becomes the soul to give life to others, and what's others shall tell us the whole creation. That V'Hiyad V'Nefesh Chai means became a soul that gives life to others. We bring from our pnimius that the whole chitenius, the world, should have the pnimius as well. Or in the language of the Mamer of Atam Nitzavim, which is two Maimarim before this one, at the end of Tafshin Lamed Dalet, Hashem gave us a tzelem, and Hashem gave us a dmus, and we bring to the dmus the mile of tzelem. We bring to the chitenius, the world, as it's a creation yesh meyayin, as it's chayis is created yesh meyayin, as it's ras is created yesh meyayin, the pnimius hakavon. For example, the body and the soul of a person. There's already a body, and it exists. And there's already a soul, and it exists. And therefore the body has its own life, it exists. It must subsequent to that be, the soul should give life to the body. Similarly, a human being is alive. Moreover, you could even say he's living on a level of Timis Achayis, but now he has to give that life to other people, and that's the third idea. So true, the yesh meyayin is b'chol rega v'rega on the levels of chitenius, of the world, and of the chayis, and of the rosh. But Rosh Hashanah is the eschachus of pnimius, and no one is saying that's b'chol rega v'rega. We're not saying it's b'chol rega v'rega. Fakert, there's moments when it doesn't even exist. But the presence of the pnimius changes the whole definition of the world, including the chitenius world. V'zehu near the bottom of 234, second paragraph. Hashayich is the Rosh Hashanah, the connection between Rosh Hashanah and the creation of man. He, in his Bible, we explained before, Sha'in, the Rosh Hashanah, the content of the Rosh Hashanah is Amshach B'chinas Apnimi, is to bring on the inner dimension, B'chinas Pnimi Satani V'chulu, the inner dimension of the light. This is drawn down in effect. It affects the external world, the world that exists as such. the world whose whole reality that Hashem made it, and his investment is so trivial, so limited, because it's only a chitzeniistic investment. Shashpo, says the Rebbe, Shashpo that Hashem's interest in this world should be not that he's creating it with weak hands, with disinterest. Hashem should have a full interest. Why? Because since he's interested in a yid, since he's interested in Torah mitzvahs, and since he's interested in the pnimis hatainug, pnimis hachachma, pnimis hamidas, pnimis hadibur, all of those things are going to play out in the chitzeniistic world. So the chitzeniistic world becomes something that the Eibush is interested in enthusiastically because of the association, because that's where the kavanah pnimis is going to be realized. This explains kavu, the Eibush that in the Torah fixed. The day Shoshana is b'yem b'rei adam rishon, the day the man was created, not the day that he created the world. Ki mailas ha'adam, he, what's special about man is Shabei nimshach b'chinas ha'pnimius, the Eibush HaKoyachal then delivers the pnimius. Kanal be'in v'yipach b'apav nishmas chayim adanav v'techiyanav, the pnimius v'elakus comes into the world. The Inyan Zehu Ma'amshech B'Chalav B'Riya Kanal is affects that even the chitzeniistic world as such, in its entirety, is affected in the idea of Hi Adam Nefesh Chaya, that Adam gives life to the whole world, that the chitzeniistic world should have pnimiistic interest on the Eibishter's part, and he should create that world with will. Asher Adam B'Chinas HaPnimi is the Adam which is the pnimiistic dimension, as the Nefesh Chaya shall call Elam, is the inner life of the whole creation. Ubemele, it may be true that b'chol rega v'rega the Eibush creates the world yesh mayayim. In the three aspects that we discussed at the end of the previous year, Rosh Hashanah is still a different kind of ischachos, because ischachos nepnimius hakavana, which of course is shalei be'erech, right? Hashem creates the world with a few words. Hashem's interest in the world is all of him. The whole of Atzmus and Hus is invested in the world. And in Rosh Hashanah this is renewed, and when it's renewed on Rosh Hashanah, it affects Hashem's investment in the world, the chitzoniistic world, as it is by itself. So the Rebbe now continues, bottom of page 234. This answers the question that separates Bein Ischachos the Rosh Hashanah, the idea that Rosh Hashanah there's a renewal, because that's a renewal of Pnimius. And Pnimius doesn't mean creation in the technical sense. Pnimius means the meaning, the purpose of creation. That Hashem should not just create the world with the koyach that he needs for the world to be able to be brought into existence, but that Hashem should invest himself in the creation as he is. Atmos mus, was der Eibush that is. Whatever Elokus is should be invested in the world. He should have an interest in the world in a pnimiistic way, and it is separately ischachos shebechol rega v'rega, for the renewal every second. Now, of course, creation is renewed every single second, and the novelty of the renewal of creation every single second is that because it's yesh meyayin, every instant Hashem has to recreate the world or the world would vanish. You can't take away that maila, you can't take away that extraordinary dependency and connection of world on the Eibishter, that b'chol rega v'rega, every single instant, the Eibishter is recreating the world, otherwise the world would disappear. But it's still an inyan chitzeni. So in other words, from the perspective of the world, it's a very big chiddush. But in terms of the divine investment, it's vayachol very limited. The notion that Hashem has to recreate the world every single second from nothing into something, from a non-thing into a thing, every instant. The Eibush renews each day. Tamid, every moment. His act of creation is taka, and then of yesh meyayin. However, it's chiddush hayishanos. It's the same world again and again. It's renewing the old. Chiddush hayishanos means he's taka creating the world again, but it's the same world. So the renewal is only in the sense that he's recreating it. It's not in what he's creating. The energy which needs to be brought forward from Elokus to create the world every single second, it's a peripheral thing, meaning to say, it's a koyach to create yesh meyayin, but in terms of what the Eibishter is, this is very chitzoniistic. This actually is the reason why this phenomena of recreation is constant. It says in Kabbalah that there's something called yichud chitzoni, the external union of Chachma and Bina. Top of page 235, that it says in Kabbalah shezivugayu tadir, that the union between Chachma and Bina is always because it's the seirach kiyam elam, it's for the sake of creating the worlds, as opposed to the zivuk pnimi of chachma bina, that's not zivuk ayatad, it's only the itim, it's on special occasions. So, in one way, the idea that every second the Eibush has created the world yesh miyayin is an incredible chiddush because the world is so dependent upon him as far as that is concerned. But in another way, it's not a chiddush because it's simply the same so-called chitzoniistic investment that the Eibush puts into the world for the world to be. Masha'enkin yichud pnimi. But here he uses oisias. Shalachein yem v'lai levagem eleyish beis. That because the yichud chitzoni is a yichud Tmidi, the zivuk chitenia of Chachma Bina, the zivuk Tmidi, every instant, the Eibush is renewing his investment in the world doesn't stop existing, and the nature of the existence is an eifin of Leish Beis. It never ever ceases. The inyan hamachadesh betu b'chol yem tamid ma'aseh bereishis. And the idea that every second, the Eibush renews the world again, is shebechinas chitenia is gufa. That on the peripheral investment of Elokus in this world, that makes the world exist uninterrupted, mischadesh tamid b'chol rega v'rega, every second has to be created again, but it's be'esei ha'oifen shahayu mekei, the way it was the moment before. So, let's use the word dependent, okay? Let's use the word dependent. The world is dependent upon Hashem constantly in order to be created. The fact that the world is dependent upon Hashem constantly to be created indicates the degree of involvement of the Creator in the world and the degree of the dependency of the vulnerability of the world on Him, right? The world is dependent upon the Eibishter. It needs Him. So in this aspect, the Yichud Chitzoni is a very strong reflector of the degree to which the world needs the Eibishter. But the investment of the Eibishter in the world that this dependency warrants is an investment just that the world should be able to exist. The Yichud Pnimi is not a Zivik Tadir, it happens occasionally. In other words, not every second do you have the kind of Yichud like you have in Rosh Hashanah. So in terms of dependency, the world is not as dependent, the world can exist without it. But in terms of what of the Eibush that is being brought forward, that's Shalei Be'erech, it's much, much more. So it's not like Rosh Hashanah's Yichud Pnimi cancels out every second's Yichud Chitzoni. Because in the end, every second's Yichud Chitzoni in a way has a mile over Rosh Hashanah. In what way does the Yichud Chitzoni have a mile over Rosh Hashanah? In the dependency aspect. And the idea that I need Hashem right now. There is no better example of the notion of I need Hashem right now than in order for me to be able to exist. As opposed to Rosh Hashanah, which is not just about me needing Hashem in order to exist. It's me needing Hashem in order to me have a relationship with Hashem and have a purposeful existence. This is not b'chol rega v'rega. So what I'm trying to say is that Rosh Hashanah is a different yichud than the yichud b'chol rega v'rega, and it's a much higher yichud because it's the investment k'vayachol of all of Elokus in creation to give the creation its purpose, its meaning, its eibishter. But there's still a mile yichud chitzeni. The yichud chitzeni still demonstrates the constant dependency of the world on Hashem in a second by second moment. You can't take away this mile of the Yichud Chitzoni. And the Rabbi adds a few words. This is of course a pasuk in Pashas Neach, that after the Mabul, the Eibush swore is never going to destroy the world again. The idea that the world will remain constantly, that Hashem is going to create the world every single second, this goes on the Yichud Chitzoni. So it's a less meaningful connection, but it's an incredibly dependent connection. So the lack of meaning is the chesaron, the absolute dependency is a maila. But you should just know that in a Mamer of the Rebbe, in a number of Mamer of the Rebbe, that we learned already, and I can't tell you which ones they are off the top of my head, the Rebbe spoke about Leish Beis. The idea that every single second Hashem has to create the world again. And the Rebbe connected Leish Beis to Tani Havaya Leishanisi. The idea that Hashem made the world in the kind of way that the world is never going to be destroyed. And the way Hashem creates the world in such a way that it's never going to be destroyed is that every second He renews it, is connected to Hashem doesn't change, and the creation reflects Him. Just as He doesn't change, the creation doesn't change either. Now this is a deeper mile in the Yichud Chitzoni. It's saying that the Yichud Chitzoni, for the sake of creation of the world, is reflecting the idea that just as the Eibishter is higher than change, the creation reflects Him in being higher than change. This is much, much more than the dependency of the world on the creation, on the Creator. This is the world in its Chitzoniistic sense, reflecting the truth of HaKadosh Baruch. So I'm trying to say, and I feel like I'm having a hard time getting it out. What I'm trying to say is that what this Mamer is hinting at is that Rosh Hashanah comes, and Rosh Hashanah is even from Pnimius, and Pnimius has Maaseh of Chitzenius. But the Rebbe also wants to say that the Milos of Chitzenius still exist. And in certain aspects, Chitzenius has a Milo over Pnimius, and I just gave you two. The first is the constant dependency of the Yichud Chitzeni of creation, and the idea of Lo Yesh Boisu, which is reflecting the idea of Havaya Leisha Nisi, Atzmus. Both of these Milos are Dafka the Yichud Chitzeni, not in the Yichud of Rosh Hashanah, in the Milo of the Yichud Pnimi. And L'cha'oira, this is the concept of Zikaron L'Yom Rishon. L'cha'oira, this is the concept of Zikaron L'Yom Rishon. The concept of Zikaron L'Yom Rishon is that even though the Ikir of Rosh Hashanah is Aleph Tishrei, not Chaf HaYelul, on Rosh Hashanah Aleph Tishrei, you remember Chaf HaYelul. Because Chaf HaYelul does have milas that Rosh Hashanah doesn't have. Number one, the dependency B'chol Rega V'Rega of Chaf HaYelul is not reflected in the Avodah and the Inyan of Rosh Hashanah. And number two, this concept of Lo Yesh Baisu, which I'm really reading more into the few words that the Rebbe brings here than is written here, but that the Rebbe Kama Pa'amim argued. There's even a Mugadika Mamer where you have this idea that the Lo Yesh Baisu and the creation is a reflection of the Leisha Nisi of Atzmus. So Rosh Hashanah comes, and there's a Yichud Pnimi, but the Zikaron L'Yom Rishon, the Yichud Pnimi of the Eibishter Kvayachal investing his tainug, all of himself, in the creation is in the kind of creation which is also dependent upon HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chol rega, and the kind of creation in which you see the mile of Leisha Nisi because of the Lo Yesh Baisu of the creation. Or to say it the other way, when Rosh Hashanah comes along, and Rosh Hashanah adds to the world, Pnimius, in other words, the tainug of the Eibishter in creation, it's adding the Pnimius to these two notions of the constancy of creation and how the Lo Yesh Baisu is reflecting Leisha Nisi. Rosh Hashanah means Hashem really cares. And not only Hashem really cares, but He invests not more, but all of Himself is invested in creation. All of the Eibishter is invested also in the constancy of creation, b'chol rega v'rega, and the idea of Lo Yesh Baisu. So we're not completely disregarding Chaf Hei B'Yelul. Forget, in some ways Chaf Hei B'Yelul has milas over Rosh Hashanah. We're simply saying Rosh Hashanah is a different mile and a higher mile, and that really Zikaron L'Yom Rishon says that the milas of both are fused. So let's continue. Page 235, 3 lines into the page. Omnam, as opposed to Ha'is Chachas, the Rosh Hashanah, the renewal of Rosh Hashanah is. Mash'oz Nimsheh B'chinas HaPnimius. The Rosh Hashanah, there's a renewal of the day of Pnimius. And again, Pnimius doesn't have to be B'chol rega v'rega. Lav Zivugah Yitadir, but Pnimius means that the Eibishter's investment in the world is far beyond what the world needs in order to exist. It's Klayachah, as if the Eibishter cares about the world for himself. V'eschat Shezu, and this renewal, which is first of all not B'chol rega v'rega. And second of all, it's not always the same. It's It's not simply that he's again investing his pnimius and again investing in pnimius, but rather, because like it says in Tanya, every year a higher light, a new higher light descends into the world. A light like this never was in this world, making the new year, Tafshin Pei Gimel, experience a level of Elokus which never existed from the beginning of time, not in Tafshin Pei Beis, not in Tafshin Pei Aleph, and not even in Beis Alofim Tafim Ches when the Torah was given. There's a new higher Gil Elokus in the world, which means that there's a new pnimius, there's a new investment klayachal of Atzmos Eitzav Baruch Hu in the creation, which is above and beyond the investment that was the year before and 2 years before, since the beginning of time. So it's the opposite of the same thing happening again and again, notwithstanding the maila in the notion of again and again. This is the maila of chiddush, of anayis, of more, of higher, of deeper. And then the Rebbe continues, I'm going to mistranslate the word af. Okay, I'm not going to ask it as a question. I'm going to say it as a statement. To be sure, the chayis of Rosh Hashanah is mischalak achakach, the Yudbeis Rosh Chodashim, is then further divided up into the 12 months, and then the individual weeks and individual days. Even every second, there's a difference in the Oyer Chodesh Elyon of the Pnimius, which is here this year from last year. So you can say that if every year there's a new pnimius, a higher pnimius, and this new pnimius is not just manifest Rosh Hashanah for the whole year, but it's divided up into 12 parts, and then it's divided up into 4 weeks, and then it's divided up into 7 days, and then it's divided up into 24 hours, then it's divided up into 60 minutes, and then it's divided up into 60 seconds, then it's divided up to even smaller units. So l'chayra, the Pnimius also has the Maila of B'chol Rega V'Rega. Says the Rabbi, what happens as the Gili of Rosh Hashanah, the Eir Chodesh Elyon Rosh Hashanah, is distributed over the course of the months and weeks and days and hours and minutes of seconds. Over the year, it's not a Chiddush. It's new from Rosh Hashanah. It's not as Chachas. Meaning to say, the idea that this Eir Chodesh is divided up over the months, and each month is a little different, and divided up over the weeks, and each week is a little different, and divided up over the days, and each day is a little bit different, and so on, none of that is Yesh Me'ayin. It's all Yesh Me'yesh. It's not Chiddush. There's one Chiddush, Rosh Hashanah. And the Chiddush, Rosh Hashanah, is then distributed and divided up over the course of the months and weeks and days and hours and minutes and seconds. Masha'en Kain, the idea that the Yichud Chitzoni, the Vogayu Tadir, that's Taka Yesh Me'ayin B'chol Rega V'Rega. So Rosh Hashanah is a higher Gilui, it's a higher Hischachus, but you're not going to call it Yesh Me'ayin. You're not going to say every single second is coming directly from Atmas Amhus so that it shouldn't disappear. Now I want you to think about this. Okay? On page 232, which we spent a lot of time on at the end of the first class, the Rebbe says that Yesh Me'ayin happens every instant, and if the Eibishter would cease to create the Yesh Me'ayin, the world would vanish. A, in the world. B, in the Chayes of the world. And C, in the Rasan for the world. And it drove me batty a little bit. It really, as they say in the modern world of psychology, it triggered me. And we talked about it a little bit. Do I understand it? I don't know. Did I understand it correctly? I certainly don't know. Did I explain it correctly? I certainly do not know. But we talked about it. We're comparing and contrasting that to this. That the Yichud Pnimi, which comes on Rosh Hashanah, is not Yesh Me'ayin. It's not. It's not new every second. So the Chayes Chitzeni of the world is new every single second. The Ratzon for the creation of the world is new every single second. The Chayes Pnimi, which is the divine investment of the Eibush in the creation that shows interest in the creation, is not new every second, even though it's a much, much higher madrega of Elokus. There isn't the Hischachas B'chol Rega, there's simply a Gili once a year, that, as the Rebbe says in the next few words, the Imkein Ein Hischachas Rak Hemshech Mehelem Al Hagilu, it's brought forward from a hidden state to a revealed state, but it's not being recreated every single second, which is interesting. The Chitzoni is the Chayes, Hashem has to make Yesh Me'ayin, or the world will not be living. The Chitzoni is the Rasan, Hashem has to make Yesh Me'ayin, or they should lose Rasan in creation. The Pnimi is the Chayes, doesn't have to be done every single second. It's brought into the world, which was renewed every single second, and it's sustained over a period of time. So what's the Havana? Why the Pnimius is not B'hischachas Yesh Me'ayin, and the Chitzonius is Yesh Me'ayin? And the Havana is that a creation is a chiddush. A creation is a change. Like it says in Shara Yichid Ve'emunah, if you make water split, you have to do it every single second, or the water is going to return to its natural state, which is made it kedarke. You take a piece of elokus, you make it into a world, the minute you stop making it into a world, it goes back to being elokus again. So has to be b'chol rega v'rega. The pnimius achayis of the world, which is connected to Reish Hashanah, is not a creation. It's an expression of the Eibishter. And the Eibishter does not renew himself every single second. He's above change. So when we said earlier that Yesh Me'ayin has to be B'chol Rega V'Rega, Yesh Me'ayin has to be B'chol Rega V'Rega, if you're making something which is separate from the Eibishter on 3 levels, the creation itself, the Chayes of the creation itself, and the Ratzon for the creation itself. But when you're talking about the Eibishter putting himself into the world to give the world its purpose and meaning, which is called Pnimius, that doesn't have to be renewed every single second, again and again and again and again, because it's not a creation from the Eibush, it's the Eibishter. The Eibush doesn't have to be renewed every single second, he doesn't have a second, he's the Malmin Azman. And I think this idea, this juxtaposition, if you think about it, is a brain twister. It's a bit hard to piece together in a healthy and a constructive way, because on the one hand, Yesh Me'ayin is the highest possible thing. Hashem is investing himself in the world to make the world anew, as opposed to this Chayes Pnimi, which is not being created anew because it's like the Eibishter himself. In other words, the idea that Rosh Hashanah is a hischachos, that is then distributed over time through the course of the year, is simply bringing a little more of the Eid HaMamale. Eid HaMamale is not a chiddush compared to Eid HaMamale. It's already in the world. When the new chayes is introduced for the entire year, this is nimshach b'chinas haseiv b'chinas HaMamale. The higher chayes, which is broader to the Rosh Hashanah, which is called pnimiyas hachayes, from the Medreg of Seiv Kolamim, which is higher than Mamale Kolamim, and that is taka chiddush. But it's not a chiddush b'chol rega v'rega. It's a chiddush only once a year. And to be sure, the pnimiyas hachayes, which is added to the world on the Rosh Hashanah, is actually not only from Seiv, it's even higher than Seiv. Why? Because Mekiv and Rosh Hashanah, what happens in Rosh Hashanah is pnimiyas hatainuk, the deepest will of Holocaust, deepest delight of the Eibishter, is invested in the creation, and pnimiyas hatainuk, we know in avodah, in a person. Pnimiyas hatainuk is higher than all the keiches, so if it's higher than all the keiches, it's higher even than Ratzon, and therefore, how they move, and it's understood, Shabam Shacham Rosh Hashanah happens at Rosh Hashanah, is Mechinas from such a level, which is Lamayl Mabachin is the same Mamale. If Ratzon is Sevim, and Keiches is Mamale, and Tainuk is even higher than Ratzon, so this is even higher than Sevim Kalam. How they move, and it's understood, Sham Shachas Rosh Hashanah, what's new on the Rosh Hashanah is Mabachin is from such a level, Shalamayl Mabachin is Mamale, it's higher than both Sevim Mamale. And it comes down into the Gil of Rosh Hashanah, which is Seviv. And the Gil of Rosh Hashanah comes on it every day. And what's called the Gil of Mamale, comes to the lowest levels. So Rosh Hashanah there's a Nayas, a Nunis, a Pnimius. And this Nunis comes from Tainug, which is even higher than Seviv and certainly higher than Mamale. And over the course of the rest of the year, that Nunis is simply revealed min Helam ala Gili, from higher than Seviv to Seviv, from Seviv to Mamale. But it's not B'derech Eschachos. So Chav Hei B'Yelul is going to remain very important in the scheme of Rosh Hashanah. In the idea of Yesh Meyayin and the few words that I've mentioned on top of this page, in the idea of Leish Beisva. Pnimis is not going to have those milas, it's going to have different milas. And we're going to join both milas together, the milas of Yesh Meyayin, of the creation, and the milah of Pnimius, and a higher aid of Rosh Hashanah. The canal, as we said before, is Pnimius HaTainug, because on Rosh Hashanah Hashem expresses an inner delight in creation. Nimshach b'Rosh Hashanah me'yor upel gam b'chinas hamayis. It affects the Chitenius Dika world. And the Chitenius Dika world that's created Yesh Meyayin b'chol rega v'rega with those milas. And it's created Yesh Meyayin b'chol rega v'rega in such Leish Beisu. Which again, I'm putting words into the Mamer from other Maimarim that are reflecting the idea of Leish Nisi. So those milas are connected to Chafei B'Yellow. And the Eibishter's Pnimius HaTainug of Rosh Hashanah enhances those milas. Shagam HaMais, the Eibish is creating the world. B'chol rega v'rega ma'im v'samuchat in a way of Leish Beisu b'kinik and Leish Nisi, which is Ashpah, B'elam is B'peil, the creation of the world itself, is Lei B'eif and Shalrif Yadayim. Hashem is creating the world is not with weak hands. Hashem is creating the world on the Chitenius Dika level, but because He's creating the world on the Chitenius Dika level, B'chol rega v'rega, with the impetus that comes from the Pnimius Dika angels, the Eibush in the creation on the Chitenius Dika level is a more precise, is more perfect, is a more invested in creation. There's more of the Eibush that is invested in the creation. So what did we learn so far in this year? That Rosh Hashanah is Milas Pnimius. Chav El's Milas is Chitenius with the Milas of Yesh Meyayin b'chol rega v'rega. Pnimius is much higher than the Mile of Yesh Meyayin b'chol rega v'rega, even though it doesn't have to be b'chol rega v'rega. And when the two are joined together, each one benefits from the other. The Chitzanya is the creation, which happened b'chol rega v'rega, because the world is so dependent upon Him. Simply to exist has a certain greater meaning and investment because of the Pnimius Chayis of Rosh Hashanah. So I guess we could say at this point we know with certitude why we make Rosh Hashanah Aleph Tishrei and we don't make Rosh Hashanah Chafei B'Yelul. It's been explained quite well. But then there's another point. Rosh Hashanah wa Mamshech Pnimius. And because Rosh Hashanah wa Mamshech Pnimius, the Ikir Mail is Rosh Hashanah and not Chafei B'Yelul. But now the question becomes, how do we do it? What's our avoid of Rosh Hashanah? So the Rebbe continues and he concludes, V'hinei. Mekivan Sham Shacha B'Rosh Hashanah Him B'chinas Pnimius HaTainug. Rosh Hashanah is the bringing down of the inner delight of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And remember, this is not always the same, and it's not going to happen automatically. If it's not always the same and it's not going to happen automatically, we have to be involved in bringing it about. It requires that a person should do work down here. The Chitenius Ha'ilam is going to go on whether we serve Hashem or we don't serve Hashem. We do the right thing, we do the wrong thing. It may be B'Rifyan Yadayim, but the investment of Hashem on a level of Yeshmein for the Chitenius elements to exist is never going to be interrupted. But the Pnimius HaChayis could be interrupted. And therefore it requires our avodah. And what is our avodah? Tzarech Pnimius HaTainuk Shalei. A Yid has to bring forward the deepest delight within him. Shayedei Zehu Mamshech B'chinas HaTainuk Pnimius HaTainuk Shalamayla. He brings forward the inner delight of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What does that mean? What does that mean? The nature of people is that something gives them pleasure. And some things don't give them pleasure. Some people enjoy music, so when they listen to music, they get pleasure. Why when they listen to music they get pleasure? Because in their neshama, the Eibishter gave them a pleasure in music that is actualized when they listen to music and they bring forward that pleasure. So the pleasure comes first, but it's hidden. The music comes second, and the pleasure from the music is the result of actually having music. Some people get pleasure from nice clothes. Why is it? The Eibishter put in their nefesh, the my love kovid, the my love teferes. Whether it's kedusha or klipa is not important at the moment. So when they wear nice clothing, they get pleasure. So the pleasure is the source of why they want nice clothing, and the nice clothing gives them an actual pleasure. So people get pleasure from many things, right? What's the deepest pleasure? The deepest pleasure is the pleasure from that thing which literally is my essence. What is the deepest essence of every creation? Certainly the deepest essence of every Jew, serving Hashem. And because the deepest essence of every Jew is serving Hashem, the deepest pleasure that a person gets is the pleasure from serving Hashem. Or to say it even deeper, it's not the pleasure from serving Hashem, it's the pleasure from being Hashem, from being connected to the Eibishter. So if we're going to kvayachol, arouse the Eibishter's Pnimius HaTainug, we have to touch and trigger our Pnimius HaTainug, which is our pleasure from this deepest relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if we trigger the tainug in our own neshama for a lakus, which is either connected to Teirah mitzvahs or even higher than Teirah mitzvahs, connected to the Eibishter himself, it'll trigger kvayachol in what you call b'derech esrusad latata, esrusad lielu, or b'derech asar shlim, or b'derech nesinas koyach, whatever words you want to use, whatever levels you want to say it, the Eibishter's tainug. And this is the Aveda of Rosh Hashanah. Our Aveda of Rosh Hashanah is to trigger the Pnimius HaTainug in ourselves, to arouse the Pnimius HaTainug Shalom Maila. How do we do it? Two things. And we had these two things in an earlier Mamer. I forgot if it's Atan Nitzav or Sefer Asis, and I apologize, they don't have my mother in front of me. One is Kabbalah Seil, the other is Simcha. Kabbalah Seil and Simcha may be seen as opposites, but the Rebbe explained to us in the previous Mamer that they're not only not opposites, they're entirely interdependent and entirely consistent with one another. The joy of being a servant of Hashem is one and the same thing, because my ability to be a servant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is because in the very essence of my being, I'm His servant. And actualizing my essence is the most delightful, the most joyous experience that a person could possibly have. So at Rosh Hashanah, we bring forward our tainug. And again, I'm quoting from an earlier Maimon. We accomplished this through our Kabbalah Seil B'Achar Shamayim. And our Simcha, that Kabbalah Seil, that's our Pnimius HaOinig, which is then going to trigger Kvayachol, the Eivish's Pnimius HaOinig, in his investment in the creation. And the Rebbe connects it to Tiku BaChodesh Shofar. He touches Tiku BaChodesh Shofar as our avodah to trigger him. V'zehu, I'm on page 235, middle paragraph, third line. V'zehu, and this is the pshat, Tiku BaChodesh Shofar. That a Yid does Tiku, which should mean he blows Shofar. But we're going to translate Tiku, he plants with a firmness, like planting the staff, the stake of pitching a tent, a yitka, ohaloi. To plant with a firmness, the Rebbe is going to say in a couple of lines from now, that the meaning of the word tkiya, which is to plant. On the next page, 236, second paragraph, third line, the Rebbe says the Lashon, Tiku means you're planting with a firmness that never changes, and over here Tiku means I'm planting in myself. Tiku, I'm planting in a way that it should never change, like it says on page 236, Shishar Kain Li'olam, BaChodesh, a renewal of my own shofar. Shofar doesn't mean the horn. Shofar means my own beauty. Shifrus, yoifi, beauty. And this yoifi is my tainu. So Tiku, I'm planting BaChodesh Shofar, the renewal of my oinig. So we're translating the words Tiku BaChodesh Shofar correctly, in the right order, in the right syntax. It's pronounced this right way. But it's not talking about a day, it's not talking about the Rosh Chodesh, and it's not talking about a shofar, it's talking about the person. So the Tiku BaChodesh Shofar, the way it's written, makes sense, as I'll go back to in a moment. Upirush HaBaal Shem Tov, and the Baal Shem Tov translated, Tiku, you have to plant, B'chidushay shel Shofar, the renewal of my own beauty. That Shofar is Lashon Shapir v'Yefi. Shofar means the beauty and the correctness of the person, which is the concept of tainug, that the person is expressed in such a way that his oineg is coming out. You see, when a person's healthy and fully expressed, there is delight in that. So the beauty of the person is a symptom of the health of the expression of their innermost depths. So Tiku, you're planting BaChodesh, the renewal of the beauty of the person, which is reflecting the gilui of the innermost pleasure of the person. BaChodesh Shofar, the meaning of the word Chodesh is Chidush Shel Shofar, and the wording of the button, the renewal of the Shofar. She'achidush ba'tainug, it's a different pleasure. Because we're now talking not about the creation of the world, this is b'chol rega v'rega without an shinui, in an eifin of leish beis, in an eifin of Chidush ha'ishanes, but rather we're talking about a higher oil, which never was in the nefesh of the person, which is yeh b'chinas pnimis ha'tainug revealed the pnimis of the person on a higher level. And every Rosh Hashanah Tiku we plant. Every Rosh Hashanah Tiku we plant BaChodesh Shofar, a renewal in the beauty of the person, which is a reflection of the inner einig of the person, which is going to trigger the inner einig l'mayla. When a person plants, and like I said to you down the next page, Rabbi is going to say he plants it with no change. BaChodesh, a renewal of his own yefi, chidush shel shofar of the person, b'chinas pnimis anish ba'adam, and this elicits b'chinas pnimis anish shel l'mayla, k'vayachal that the Eibusha should reciprocate by bringing down a new, higher light of pnimis hatainik shel l'mayla, which is a reaction to the renewal in the pnimis hatainik in the person. And the Rabbi says, "Who in Yanais Chachos the Rosh Hashanah canal?" That's what happens new on Rosh Hashanah. The world per se has no newness; it's always the same. And faket, you could say that there's a big mile in this always being the same. This is the leish besu, which reflects the leish you see, but there's no chiddush. Rosh Hashanah is lavdavka yesh meyayin, is adag b'chol rega v'rega, but chiddush it is. And the chiddush begins with ourselves. And the Rebbe says, that's why the Rebbe asked, Chodesh means Reish Chodesh. So we should say, Tiku b'Chodesh Hashvi Shofar. Why do we say b'Chodesh Stam? Because we're not talking here about a month. We're not talking about a time. We're talking about an exercise. And the exercise is to plant the newness of Shofar. Chodesh doesn't mean month, and Shofar doesn't mean a horn. Chodesh means newness, and Shofar means the beauty of the person. Chodesh is Lashon Chidush. In this case, Chodesh doesn't mean Reish Chodesh. It means the renewal on a higher level of the Yefi within the person. And the idea that in Rosh Hashanah is a renewal is not identified by a day. It's the primary event of the Chidush of the higher Eid, as it's going to relate to the whole year, because all the subsequent novelties, which the Rebbe explained is going to happen during the day, the months and weeks and days and hours and minutes, seconds, of course, of the subsequent years. So Tiku b'Chodesh means there's one moment in the year when you plant a newness for the whole year, and you don't identify a time, because that newness is for all time, for the whole year. It's only that it happens at one moment, and the nature of the Chiddush is b'Shofar. The renewal is in the Yefi of Elokus. So we answered why it says Tiku b'Chodesh without specifying which month, because Chodesh doesn't mean a month, Chodesh means newness. And we also answered why it doesn't say b'Shofar, Tiku b'Chodesh Shofar. Because b'Chodesh Shofar is one thing, it's not two things. B'Chodesh doesn't mean month and Shofar means a horn. B'Chodesh Shofar means the renewal of beauty. Tiku, you plant b'Chodesh Shofar, the renewal of the Yefi of a Yiddish Neshama, as a medium to revealing the newness of the Yefi, the Tainuk Shalamayla. And now the Rebbe says a very nice word. This explains something else. Tishrei is called the 7th month. I'm going to be honest. I would bet money that what the Rebbe is about to say is someplace in Eretz. The Rebbe is not making this up. It's too big a chiddush. Now, it's entirely possible that it is a Rebbe's word, and there are no mukoides. The Rebbe is not mitzaying to any mocker in saying this word, but I would guess as an Eretz. But I would love to be wrong. I would love so much for this to be an original word from the Rebbe. And that is a Chodesh called Chodesh Hashvi. Now you know the Yonatan ben Uziel, I mentioned it earlier in the Mamer, that it says in the Maimorim of Pesach, right? So the Yonatan ben Uziel says on that pasuk that the ancient ones used to call Chodesh Nisan the 7th month, and Tishrei was the 1st month, and now Nisan is the 1st month, and Tishrei is the 7th month. And when you learn the Maimorim of Pesach, it's sort of an achmanas on Tishrei, right? Tishrei used to be the head of the year, but it was only the head of the year. Then when Pesach comes, it changes. So Tishrei is called the 7th month because it was demoted, right? Because it lost its status as being Chodesh Rishon to Pesach. Comes again the Rebbe, here comes our Rebbe, fully aware of that Yenus and Menazil, fully aware that the idea that when Hashem created the world, Tishrei was Chodesh Rishon, and Nisan was Chodesh Hashvi. And now after Nisan becomes Chodesh Rishon, and Tishrei becomes Chodesh Hashvi. And Bepashta, this is the Chesed of Chodesh Hashvi, and he makes it into an unbelievable Maila. Nisan, Tishrei is called Chodesh Hashvi, not because the new head of the year is Nisan, because Chodesh Hashvi has a Maila even over Nisan. He doesn't mention the idea that would immediately come to mind, that Chodesh Hashvi is Muspa, it's said with alla gute Zachen, Lashon Soiva. He says something else. The question is, the given Shebereish Hashanah was Chachas Achayis Kol Hashanah Kula. If on Reish Hashanah there's renewal of the Pnimius Achayis for the whole year, right? The Chitainis the Achayis is B'chol Rega V'Rega, but the Pnimius Achayis is Rosh Hashanah for the whole year. And you say Tiku B'Chodesh Tam because it's one moment for the whole of the year. So L'Cheir Harei Chodesh Rishon Tishrei should be called Chodesh Rishon, not because of creation alone. It should be called Chodesh Rishon because of the Hamshach Pnimius, and it should be even higher than Pesach. Higher than Chodesh Hazel Lachem Reish Chodashim, Rishnu Lachem L'Chad Shashana of Nisan. Ella, the Teret says, She'inyan Chodesh Hashvi, the notion of the 7th month. And the association of Tishrei with the 7th month is not because of a Chesed in Tishrei, but of an unbelievable Maila. Why? Because it's Moira al Tikan Hashvi. It shows on the 7th of the 13 Midas HaRachamim of the Tkuma, according to the 13 attributes of mercy, or the beautifications of the beard. Shu Tikkun Ve'emes, which is the middle of the 7 Tikkunim, which is Ve'emes. Shu Ponim Mishayres, where there's no hair. The Yigimah Midas HaRachamim, there's my bottom of the Rebbe on this, my the early Rabbi on this. Yigimah Midas HaRachamim are explained in a variety of different ways, like 10 plus 3, and other, or 3 plus 10, 10 and 3 below it, 10 and 3 above it. And one of the ways that Yigimah Midas HaRachamim are explained, there are 6 and 6 and 1. 6 midas on one side, 6 midas on the other side, and then the middle one. Now, of course, according to that Arizal, we don't count Hashem Hashem. So the first midas is Keil, Rachum, Chanun, Erech, Apayim, that's 5, Rav Chesed is 6, and Ve'emes is the 7th. And you have Neitzer Chesed is the 8th, La'alofim is 9, Neisi Oven is 10, Neisi Pesha is 11, Neisi Chatoa is 12, and Menake is 13, and Ve'emes is this middle one. So this is in Likutei Torah in Pashas Masei. The 7th Tikkun Ve'emes shows on the cheeks, which is Panim Mishayres, where there's no hair at all. It's hard in the day of Shayres. Here's the concept. The head has big holes, and little holes, and no hole. The big holes are the mouth, and the ears, and the nose, and the mouth, and the eyes. Those represent the Esek Koiches HaNefesh. The Koiches HaNefesh are the most revealed part of the neshama. The neshama is infinite, and in your mind, a little tiny piece of what the neshama is brought down to such a degree that you can fully own it, you can understand it, you can add more to it, you can change it, you can question it. And the same is true in all the Gesek HaNefesh. So the big gates represent a much lower gili, but a far more manifest gili. The second madrega is the shaydes, the hair. The hair is like a little thin tube where the orifice, the hole is very, very small, which shows that the chayes eliki is very, very bitzimtzum. But it's chayes eliki from a much higher level, which is coming down in the way of tzimtzum. This goes on the makif. In other words, we're talking about things in the neshama which are so high that they cannot come down in such a way that they're fully manifest, like my mind and my heart. So they come down in such a way where it's a higher gilui, but it's less behislapshus. Meaning to say, it's revealing something much, much higher, and I appreciate it less. I'm able to internalize it less. As opposed to the koiches hanefesh, it's a much lower gilui, and I'm able to internalize it more. So you have the big holes, are the eyes, the ears, the nose, and the mouth. The little holes are the hair. And then you have the forehead and the cheeks, which are masks. There's nothing being revealed. Nothing being revealed means the godliness is completely concealed. But on the other hand, where the godliness is being completely concealed, you have the revelation of the etzem itself. On the countenance of a person's face, which is his metzach and his beis apen, his forehead and his two cheeks. So from the perspective of what you're able to experience, you're experiencing nothing. But from the perspective that they're revealing the truth, they're revealing the highest truth. So the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim represent Shaidas, the hair. Meaning, it's a higher Gilui which is manifest less. But the Tikkun Ve'emes is higher than the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim. It's the 13th attribute, which is above the 12 other attributes, which is represented by the face, which doesn't reveal anything in a way of hislapshus, in a way that you're able to appreciate it and value it. But at the same time, it's revealing etzem, which is higher than anything else. So the number 7 represents Tikkun Ve'emes, which is such a high level of godliness that in terms of experience, you have nothing, but in terms of what you have, it's the whole truth. So the Rebbe says, you know why Tisha is Chedesh HaShvi? Not because it's been demoted, not because it's been supplanted by Pesach or Nisan, which is now called Chedesh Edition. It's called Chedesh HaShvi because the idea of Chedesh HaShvi is the hischachus of the Pnimis HaChayis HaVeliki, the Pnimis HaEnig Elki, in the Eibish's relationship with the world, and that's the idea of the number 7. It's above a Gilui. It's the highest Gilui, it's the deepest Gilui, and it's above a Gilui. In other words, you don't experience it. You don't experience it like the Koiches, you don't even experience it like the Makifim, you don't experience it at all, but it's completely revealed. Like the idea B'Kolos of Hamoiru Be'ezgalos. So the Tisha is the 7th month because it's revealing such a high level of godliness that on the one hand it's the whole truth, and on the other hand we're not a keli for it directly, like Koiches, or indirectly, like the Midas Harachamim. It just is. And that's emes, right? And you can understand the psychology of that when you're mizbonin in what emes is. When you see the truth, you become completely bezbatlos because the emes is an absolute thing, and the number 7 is connected to emes. The ischachus of Primius Oinig of Reish Hashanah is the madreg of emes. So it's being the 7th month is the biggest mile possible. The Rebbe spins it. I've never come across this verse before, and there's no Makoyres here. So perhaps the Rebbe is saying it al das atzmei, which is moidendik, min levendach, mit unser Rebbe, unser da, like the Rebbe said, Mashiach is going to come, and the date of Moshe Rabbeinu is to go to Moshe Rabbeinu, the date of Yeshua ben Nun is to go to Yeshua ben Nun, the date of the Alter Rebbe to the Alter Rebbe. Well, wir will gehen mit dem Rebbe. The Rebbe said, of course, we'll gehen mit dem Rebbe dem Shver, but we're going to go with our Rebbe. So our biggest koch is anything which is the Rebbe's, Korev Eleinu. And since there's no Makaidas, perhaps this vart, that Tisha is the 7th month, not only because it's Muspa Bakel, but because it represents Tikkun Ve'emes. It's a Gili which is so high that there's no Tzimtzum in it, there's no Islapshus in it, but it's completely revealed as represented by the Metzach and the Beis Appen that upon him Mishaitis. This is why it's Chedesh HaShvi. Because Aseret Esei we know about Aseret Esei, and the Emes is all of Tishrei. Because in Sukkot it's B'Kava Simcha. Aseret Esei and Kava Yira. Me'irim and Gimel Yisrachim, the 13 attributes of Mercer revealed like it says in the Gemara and Nigla the Torah. Using the pasuk Mamer, as on the pasuk Dish, was Hashem being Matzek Ru, B'Yisei Karif went to Abraham to be close. Asore Yom Shebei Neshal Yemek Yipur into the Gil Yimid Yisrachim. However, we Gimel Tikkun Dik Gufa, the Gimel Yisrachim represent Giloim Hayd and Ishtalshus. But the other 12 midas are revealed with derech shaydes, meaning to say they're a very high gili, and they come but derech tzimtzum gadol, meaning to say our experience of it is very b'medida v'agbala. But there's some kind of experience of it, and then there's tikkun hazayin, which is the absolute truth, and there's no experience, but it's completely revealed. Says the Rebbe, ubiyud gimel tikkun adikna gufa, and the 13 attributes of mercy itself. Yeshmaila b'tikkun hashvi, the 7th of the 13 adornments, 7 of the 13 beautifications. It's ponim shaydes has no hair, because it's above any kind of gilu, it's above any kind of tzimtzum. It's how the etzem itself is brought forward. So on the one hand it's completely revealed, on the other hand it's not revealed at all. That's why it's called the 7th month. The novelty of Reish Hashanah, which is new, as opposed to the novelty of every minute, which is not new. It's simply Chiddush HaYishanus Noev LaYish Beisu. So it's B'pnim, it's Atan Din Taneg BaChodesh Baruch. Says the Rebbe Shebechin Zu, this idea in the terms of the Gimel Midas Harachamim is a tzimtzum. Now, but then it's a tzimtzum shalamayla miseidish tamtus. Comes on b'derech shar, sinus, hair. So tzad echad you have no real gefil. Tzad hasheni it comes down unchanged. But then you have the tikkun ve'emes, which is lamayla mikol inyan not tzimtzum v'shar. It's not tzimtzum at all. And if it's not tzimtzum at all, it's revealed just the way it is. The problem with being revealed just the way it is that we don't get it. So we're getting completely something which we're not able to get at all. Like the idea of Hamoed Bezgal, Hashem is fully revealed, but it doesn't appeal to our consciousness, it appeals to our very essence. And that's the inyan of Chodesh Hashvi, not Stam Yod Gimel Mitzvah Rachmim, but the Tikkun Ve'emes. And the Rabbi, now that it finishes the Maimah, that the Pasuk says that you plant with the firmness the Chiddush of Shofar, of Pnimius HaTainug in yourself. That in Rosh Hashanah it's Bakesa, it's hidden. And the Yom Chagenu in Sukkot is going to be revealed. So Omer Zal, the Gemara says, which Yom Tov is there no moon? Have Rosh Hashanah. So Tiku B'Chodesh Shofar Bakesa Yom Chagenu. The way the Gemara translates it, Bakesa Yom Chagenu goes on Rosh Hashanah as well. The Zeshanikra Bakesa Rosh Hashanah, Nikra Bakesa Rosh Hashanah is called concealed. The Fisha Oz who Amit Sina Kisav has this true concept of concealment. Because the Fisha B'Rosh Hashanah Chedim called Zal Makat Musamam, Rosh Hashanah everything disappears. But everything disappears means the disappearance of the Pnimius. The Chitzonius is never new. And it never disappears, but it's never new. It's B'chol Rega V'Rega the same as the Shayishanas. The Pnimius disappears, and that's a religion of Bakesa. The idea that every second the wood is created again, it's not concealed at all. It's not departing at all. What happens the next second is the same as the second before. So the departure is not really a departure, it's simply a need for renewal. Rosh Hashanah is a Gilia Pnimius, and every year it's a new Gilia Pnimius. So therefore, there's an interruption of what was. Histalkos, a departure of a Kisi Amit, a true covering over, which is why Rosh Hashanah is called Bakesa. And then it's renewed on a higher level. And this is the Ma'ila of Rosh Hashanah of Chiddush of the Pnimius HaTainug. Now you want to throw in right here that this Pshat, Tiku B'Chodesh Shofar Bakesa L'Yom Chagenu, Kesa goes to Rosh Hashanah, and Chag also means Rosh Hashanah, is in the Gemara. And Chsidus Bakesa L'Yom Chagenu is a dish that's concealed in Rosh Hashanah, revealed on Sukkot. Now the reason I'm saying it here is because the Rebbe doesn't say it in the Mamer. Page 236, second paragraph, let's finish. V'zehu Tiku B'Chodesh Shofar. That's why Rosh Hashanah, there's a Tiku B'Chodesh Shofar, which doesn't mean blowing shofar. It means planting the newness of the Einik HaPnimi. Bakesa, on that date, when godliness is concealed, the Yom Chagenu, because it's the Yom Tov where the concealment of godliness is maximum. B'Chodesh Stam. The idea of newness doesn't mean the month of Tishrei or any month. It means his chachos, the renewal of Rosh Hashanah. So the word Chodesh doesn't mean a time. It means an idea of newness. Because Oz Nimshach HaChodesh HaYim the newness is something which never happened before. So B'Chodesh Stam means a newness which has no context. It's an absolute newness. It's completely above any division of time. Whatever newness is introduced this Rosh Hashanah, Tafshin Pei Gimel is never going away. Tafshin Pei Dal is going to be a higher one. But Tiku means Sheishar Kain Liel. And of course you can stay L'cha'eda when the end of the year comes, it all goes away. So what's made Sheishar Kain Liel? So let's leave that question unanswered. We plant the newness of Rosh Hashanah B'Shofar by revealing our Pnimius HaTainug, Shapro Masechem, beautifying our own actions and revealing our inner Tainig. And the Chodesh Shofar, that there's a newness in this beauty, our own beauty is renewed. The work of the person, the inner delight of the human being, which is this elicits that the Eibish's Tainug is renewed, which is what Rosh Hashanah is about, a renewal of the Eibish's Tainug. So that's a Pshatika B'Chodesh Shofar B'Kesel L'Yom Chagenu. And we answered all the questions, I think. And the next pasuk says, Ki Chekli Yisrael Hu Mishpat L'Kei Yankiv, and Rosh Hashanah there's a judgment. And the judgment, in fact, Gashmis and Ruchnis. And you know the Sikha and the Sikha is Chelik Yates, which the Rebbe is not Mitzayin to here, but he's Mitzayin in many places, that Rosh Hashanah comes and you ask Hashem for your needs, you're trying to make Hashem into a king, you're trying to be mevatli yourself to him, you're trying to be mechadesh your own shofar, why are you asking him for food? And the answer is the Chekli Yisrael Hu, which is Gashmias, and the Mishpat L'Kayankiv, which is Ruchnias, is asking him to give us the tools to be able to serve him. Mer Godnisht. So let's read it. Mamshech, because of the pasuk continues, Chekli Yisrael Hu Mishpat L'Kayankiv, there's a judgment for Yisrael. And there's a judgment for L'Kei Yankiv Mishpat. L'Kei Yankiv says the Rebbe, the judgment for the God of Yankiv means the godliness of Yankiv. Each year, Rosh Hashanah Hashem determines. He gives us an allotment of divine revelation to each one, the full and open and holy, or overflowing and broad hand for the whole year. In other words, as much as we say Hakel b'dei Shemayim v'chutz b'yidei Shemayim, the Eibush determines in Rosh Hashanah how much of Elokus and Ruchnius we're going to have. Moreover, v'cheik li Yisrael, who means that Rosh Hashanah nimshach gamash b'gashmis, Hashem determines how much we're going to b'gashmis. Because the word cheik is like the Lashon HaPasuk hatefeni lechem chuki, give my portion, my allotted portion of parnasa for the day, for the week, for the month, and for the year, and for the second. To each one of us, and again, so the Ticheik Yisrael Hu Mishpat Lelekei Yankiv is what the Eibush that gives us to be able to serve Hashem during the subsequent year as a reaction to the Tiku BaChodesh. The Tiku BaChodesh, we renew our own Yofi to elicit Pnimis Einik Shal Maila, and then the Eibush is going to give us what we need to serve the Eibush that in the environment of this new Gilui Elokus. And he concludes, says the Rebbe, V'hu Shav Rosh Hashanah Nimshach, which means, in other words, Rosh Hashanah Hashem determines how much Gashmis we're going to have, how much Ruchnis we're going to have. And certainly that is Ksiva V'chasim B'tev, to be written and sealed for a good year, Lashon HaTeva, Masukah, the good and sweet year. But Gashmis and Ruchnis, physically and spiritually, for every single Yid. So there's a judgment about Chuki, Panos Gashmis. There's a judgment about the Lekei Yankiv, Panos Ruchnis, and every single Yid's judgment is an Eifen of Ksiva V'chasim Teva. And the Rebbe says, V'hiratzin, to be the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shebekorev Mamish. In addition to the Ksiva V'chasim Teva, which the Eibush certainly gave us. Take of Miyad Mamish Tubtzar Gama Bracha Ikez V'Klal. We should bring down the blessed, which is the most important of all, and the most close of all. B'yes Mashiach said, Keni B'Korev Mamish B'Gam Adinan.